she's so fine. Hell of a ride, blows my mind. Hell of a ride, lights my day.
What's good, guys? This story is coming out of the New York Times, coming out of Minnesota, and regarding Daunte Wright. And I urge anyone who had a comment regarding why didn't the Army Lieutenant Karan Nazario get out of the car as he was instructed to do. I hope you guys are listening, and I hope you listen to this story as well. Minnesota officer who shot Daunte Wright meant to fire Taser, chief says. Officials ordered a curfew for much of the Twin Cities region after a night of unrest and released body camera video of the killing. This is a photo outside of Cup Foods showing justice for Daunte Wright wrote on the pavement near the George Floyd Memorial. The officer who fatally shot a black man during a traffic stop near Minneapolis mistakenly confused her gun for her taser, police officials said on Monday, quickly releasing video as they tried to ease tensions in a state on edge over the Derek Chauvin trial. In a brief clip of body camera video, officers from the Brooklyn Center Police Department can be seen trying to handcuff the driver, Daunte Wright, before he suddenly lurches back into his car. One of the officers, whose name has not been released, aims a weapon at Mr. Wright and shouts, quote, "Taser, taser, taser," end quote. She fires one round and Mr. Wright groans in pain. Quote, "Holy shit, I just shot him," end quote, the officer can be heard shouting. The fatal shooting on Sunday took place in a region already at the center of a national reckoning over police officers' use of force against black people. As the investigation into Mr. Wright's death in Brooklyn Center was beginning on Monday, prosecutors in a courtroom less than 10 miles away completed the questioning of their witnesses in the trial of Mr. Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer charged with murdering George Floyd last May. The Twin Cities braced for unrest on Monday evening, and a 7 p.m. to 6 a.m. curfew was issued for much of the metro area. Protests were announced in cities like Portland, Oregon, and New York. The mayors of Minneapolis and St. Paul declared states of emergency. Professional baseball, basketball, and hockey games in Minnesota were postponed. The shooting of Mr. Wright, 20, whose autopsy revealed that he was shot once in the chest, caused an immediate outcry across the state, protests and looting in Brooklyn Center, and recognition by President Biden, who said he was praying for the Wright family and called for an investigation. Quote, "We do know that the anger, pain, and trauma amidst the black community is real," end quote, Mr. Biden said at the White House. He also said, quote, "In the meantime, I want to make it clear again, there is absolutely no justification, none, for looting. No justification for violence. Peaceful protest, understandable," end quote. Governor Tim Walz, a Democrat, angrily demanded that state lawmakers pass police reform that has languished since Mr. Floyd's death. He said he was going straight from the news conference to the Capitol in St. Paul. Quote, "Our time was made clear last May in Minnesota," Mr. Walz said, alluding to the death of Mr. Floyd. "Our time to get one shot at fixing it was there. And in the midst of this trial that the world's watching, the situation repeated itself yesterday," end quote. The fatal police shooting comes at a particularly fraught moment. Quote, "Everyone in the metro area is on tenterhooks right now," said Abigail Sarah, a Minneapolis civil rights lawyer and a member of the Minneapolis Police Conduct Oversight Commission, noting that her husband, a firefighter, is among the many emergency workers throughout the region who have been told to keep their gear with them at all times as the trial proceeds. She questioned why Mr. Wright, who the police said was stopped for driving a vehicle with an expired registration, would have been pulled over at all. Quote, "Everyone is on high alert right now," she said. "I don't know why they would be making traffic stops like this at this moment in time," end quote. The police said officers attempted to detain him after they discovered that there was a warrant for his arrest, stemming from a missed hearing on a misdemeanor gun charge. Mr. Wright was facing 2 misdemeanor charges after Minneapolis police said he had carried a pistol without a permit and had run away from officers last June. Katie Wright told reporters that her son had been driving a car his family had given him 2 weeks ago, and that he had called her as he was being pulled over. Quote, he said they pulled him over because he had air fresheners hanging from his rearview mirror, she said. Miss Wright added that her son had been driving with his girlfriend when he was shot. The police said a woman in the car had been hurt in a crash that occurred as the vehicle kept moving after the shooting. The officer who shot Mr. Wright was described as a, quote, senior officer, but was not publicly identified. She has been placed on administrative leave, officials said. Quote, it is my belief that the officer had the intention to deploy their taser, but instead shot Mr. Wright with a single bullet, end quote. Chief Tim Gannon of the Brooklyn Center Police Department said in a news conference. Quote, for all intents and purposes, I think we can look at the video and ascertain whether or not she'll be returning, end quote, Chief Gannon said. That's a picture of Chief Gannon, Brooklyn Center Police Chief. Mike Elliott, the mayor of Brooklyn Center, urged calm in the city and promised that an investigation would be conducted by the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, a state agency that investigates police killings in Minnesota. Quote, we recognize that this couldn't have happened at a worse time, said Mr. Elliott, the city's first black mayor. First black mayor, and it's 2021. Quote, we recognize that this is happening at a time when our community, when all of America, indeed all of the world, is watching our community, end quote. The racial makeup of the suburb, home to 30,000 residents, was until recently mostly white, but now less than half of the residents are white and nearly a third are black. Mr. Elliott, who has been mayor for 2 years, called for the officer who shot Mr. Wright to be fired. Quote, my position is that we cannot afford to make mistakes that lead to the loss of life of other people in our profession, he said. And so I do fully support releasing the officer of her duties. Minnesota has seen more than its share of high-profile police killings, including the shootings of Philando Castile in 2016 and Jamar Clark in 2015, and then Mr. Floyd's death last year. In the final days of the prosecution's case against Mr. Chauvin, Mr. Floyd's brother, Philanice Floyd, took the stand, telling of their upbringing in Houston. George would help his siblings get dressed for school and made the best banana mayonnaise sandwiches, his brother said. George couldn't cook, but he'll make sure you have a snack or something. The state also called 2 expert witnesses, a cardiologist who said Mr. Floyd's death was absolutely preventable, and a policing expert who said a reasonable officer would not have put Mr. Floyd face down since he was already in handcuffs and was not a threat. In the wake of Mr. Wright's death on Sunday, Mr. Walls and other officials in Minnesota called for policing reforms, including making sure that officers cannot mistake their guns for their taser. Quote, why can't we have tasers that look and feel differently? Mayor Melvin Carter of St. Paul said. That you could never mistake for deploying a firearm, so that we can ensure that that mistake, which has happened before, can never happen again, end quote. Ed Obayashi, a California-based expert on the use of force by law enforcement and a deputy sheriff, said that with appropriate training, it should be difficult for officers to confuse a gun with a taser, quote, but unfortunately it does happen. This is not the first time and it won't be the last, end quote. In most cases, said Deputy Obayashi, who is a lawyer, the confusion occurs when officers carry both weapons on the same side of their body, or holster their stun guns on the opposite side of their body with the grip facing backward, so that they can use their dominant hand to cross-draw. Instances of police officers accidentally firing a handgun when they meant to draw their tasers, while not uncommon, are not entirely unusual either. In 2015, a former Oklahoma Reserve deputy killed an unarmed man when he accidentally grabbed his handgun. In 2018, a rookie Kansas police officer mistakenly shot a man who was fighting with a fellow officer. And in 2019, a police officer in Pennsylvania shouted, quote, "Taser," end quote, before shooting an unarmed man in the torso. Within hours of Mr. Wright's death, people clashed with the police outside of the Brooklyn Center police station, where officers fired tear gas and rubber bullets at protesters, some of whom threw bags of garbage and rocks. On Monday, Brooklyn Center braced for another night of protests as businesses were boarded up, windows were smashed, and a security alarm at a TJ Maxx was still ringing. Hundreds of additional National Guard troops were flooding the metro area, adding to troops that had been standing by during Mr. Chauvin's trial. Residents said they were struggling to absorb the news of another death at the hands of a police officer while the Chauvin trial was underway in Minneapolis. Quote, "I'm really saddened," said Laura Visinor, 56. "I just don't understand it, and I don't understand how you yell taser and then fire your gun. It doesn't make sense." No, it doesn't make sense. Let's go back to some of these pictures. This is a picture of protesters kneeling near a police line in Brooklyn Center on Sunday night. So last night. This shows debris of the TJ Maxx in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota on Monday, today. You see someone holding up a Black Lives Matter sign. It says Minneapolis has been on edge as the trial of Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer, who has been charged with murdering George Floyd, is underway in Minneapolis courtroom less than 10 miles away from where Mr. Wright was shot. I'm going to show you this map, which actually outlines just how closely the two are. This shows a crowd gathering on Sunday night near the scene of the shooting in Brooklyn Center. Here's the map. So you can see where Daunte Wright was shot by police. And you can also see where George Floyd was killed. And also where the trial of Derek Chauvin is being held. Now, for those of you that left a comment saying, why didn't Mr. Nazario just get out of the vehicle as he was ordered to do? Would you? I guess that's my main question. Would you have done that? Hearing of all of these cases and seeing it day in and day out, and then to have someone actually yell taser 3 times and pull out their service revolver and shoot someone? Come on, man. You got to wake up. You got to wake up. It's 2021. I would be scared to get out of the car. I don't trust them. I just don't. I know every field has their bad apples. But it just seems that the police departments have a lot more barrels of those bad apples. I'm going to end this story on that note. It's ridiculous. Thanks for watching, guys.